Hello students, in this video lecture I am going to discuss a very important topic that is not there as a separate part in any of the component of your syllabus, but this part is found everywhere. In your examinations, very often you find a question, write a critical appreciation of the poem. Critically examine this poem. So, what are the basic points which must be included in poetry analysis? When you examine a poem, I have seen some students reading a poem and then summarizing it and saying that it's critical appreciation of the poem. It's the critical analysis of the poem. But this is not the critical analysis of a poem if you are summarizing a poem. You have to include the literary elements which are found there. So what are those points which must be included in the critical appreciation of a poem? And how should you, discuss the poem? These are the points which I will be discussing in my video lecture. The critical analysis will be perfect when you are trying to find out some images, symbols, figurative devices used by the poet to support the theme of a particular poem. I also suggest you to watch the other videos which are based on the figures of speech and other literary devices. Because if you are not familiar with the literary devices, then you will not be able to analyze the poem critically. So let us now start the topic, how to analyze a poem critically. Before I proceed further, I would like to clarify that I am not going to tell you the analysis of a poem which is a part of practical criticism, that a poem is given to you and you are required to analyze that poem as a new critic say. I am going to tell you that if a poem is given to you, a poem which is prescribed in a course, and you are asked to write the critical appreciation of that poem, then how will you write it? To me, it also, seems to me that, poems are, supposed to be felt rather than appreciated. But even then, since this question is generally there in the examination and a very significant for the students to know. So if a poem is, given to you for writing the critical appreciation, then I think you must be knowing the title of the poem and the poet also. So that has to be kept in mind first, that what is the title of the poem and who is the poet. Because that decides the basic the idea, the basic content, the basic theme of the text. And when you are going to analyze it, evaluate it, you should write something about the poet, because poet, we have the impression of the poet on the poem. Maybe, there must have been some reason why the poet wrote that poem. For example, why On His Blindness was written, why the prelude was written. So you must write something about the poet before coming to the context of the poem. That this poem was written, in, say, for example, Jacobean age. This poem was written Elizabethan age, in that particular, situation. because most of the time, most of the poems, for example, are prompted by some political situations, maybe by some war or something like that. Then come to the context of the poem. This is very important. You have to write the time and location of the poem and what prompted the poet to write this poem. As I have just told you that, while writing the context of the poem, maybe this poem was published in a collection, in some collection, so you should mention the name of that collection. That this poem was published in such and such collection of poems. And the context of the poem might be some, event of great political significance, as I told you, like French Revolution or some other, event. So you should mention it in context of the poem. Sometimes source of the poem is also very important. That you're going to write what is the source. Maybe some other poem became the source of that, or the reason of that. So after writing all these points about, say, title, poet, and context, source, then write the setting. What is the setting of the poem? This again is very important, the setting of the poem, because the poem has a specific setting, and sometimes setting provides us the theme to the poem. Now, before writing all these points, you are required to make at least 3 readings of the poem. Then come to substance of the poem. Gist of the poem. Or you can say summary of the poem in brief. You're going to highlight some essential parts of the poem, some essential phrases and words. And those points which are intelligible to the common readers. If it is possible, your summary, your basic ideas should be in accordance with the stanzas of the poem. So that will make it more readable. That if there are, say, for example, 5 quatrains. So if you're writing a summary, just write it, quatrain wise, that in first quatrain it happens, then second, then third. Then talk about genre of the poem. That what genre of the poem is this? Is it an ode or a ballad or a sonnet or whatever kind it is? You are going to, you have to analyze it. That what kind of genre it is. Maybe it's a satire, so you'll just specify that satire. Maybe it's a parody, so just write down that it's a parody. Then after that, what you are going to do is that you are interpreting certain lines. Those lines which are conveying some, meaning, because the message is very important. So you just take few lines and interpret them. Those lines which are trying to give some message to the poem. And related to this is the inner meaning, the hidden meaning. Like, for example, I teach a poem, The Thought Fox, by Tedues to semester 2 students. It's, the poem, runs, say, in 15-20 lines. And just in the end of the poem, this is the line, the page is printed. And here lies the significance of the poem. Here lies the message of the poem, and here lies the inner meaning of the poem. So we're going to take this line, going to interpret it and analyze it, and telling the message of the poem and also the inner meaning. So take few lines and interpret them. For example, if say you're going to analyze Ode to the West Wind, and then you will take, if winter comes, can spring be far behind. There's a line actually which is very significant, and you are going to analyze it and going to tell us that what is actually the inner meaning or the message of the poem. Similarly, you will talk about relevance of the theme. In what way the theme is relevant, and in what way the theme is relevant to each one of us. Or on his blindness, for example, they also serve only stand and wait. It's actually the line, the theme, which is very relevant. Now, then you talk about intertextuality. Intertextuality, something which is very important. What is this intertextuality? You'll try to relate this poem with other texts. Maybe this poem has the echoes of some other poems. Then you will give the reference of that. For example, if you're going to analyze Canterbury Tales by Chaucer, then you will say that it has the echo of Boccaccio's Decameron, because the same pattern is there, narration of the story and all that. So you have to find out in the poem intertextuality, that does the poem have the echo of some other poems which were written in the past? You have to give the reference of those poems. Coming to very important point, and this I think is a part of practical criticism, which you are also required to do. We're going to discuss language and style. This is something which is very important. You are supposed to describe the language, figurative or non-figurative, by the poet. You are required to write the style, mood, and tone of the poem. You are also required to write the rhyme scheme, the rhythm of the poem. Tone you can, or the mood you can write in the beginning also. Like, for example, when you are going to, interpret the lines, the point which I have told you here. For example, you're going to write, analyze, the curfew tolls the knell of the parting day. The curfew tolls, it's opening quatrain of Elegy in a Country Churchyard. Now there, the mood is actually melancholic, elegiac. You have to mention it. Setting is in accordance with the mood, because setting is graveyard. Language is also in accordance with the mood, because tolls and all that, they increase the mood of the poem and the theme of death actually. So you are going to find it out. You are also going to find out some technical devices. Maybe some illusion is there, you have to find out. And you are also going to find out some figures of speech, some images, some symbols which are supporting, the poem. And this part of, I think, language and style is very important. And for that, you must be familiar with all the figures of speech, rhetoric and prosody, because without that, I think you will not be able to understand it. I'll just take one stanza, one quatrain, in order to, explain to you the language, style, mood, and the literary devices. So I think you can better understand it. Let me write it. Can storied, urn, or animated bust back to its mansion call the fleeting breath? Can honors voice provoke the silent dust, or flattery soothe the dull, cold ear of death? This is actually a quatrain. I hope you must have understood that the source of the poem is elegy written in a country churchyard. Now, you must have studied this poem, but I have taken this quatrain actually in order to explain some literary devices to you. Now, you know that Thomas Gray is a master of poetic diction. So you must be very cautious while analyzing these lines. There are many figures of speech which are used in this quatrain. Line 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, you see, look at these two lines, these. Can storied urn or animated bust back to its mansion call the fleeting breath? Then, can honor's voice provoke the silent dust, or flattery soothe the dull cold ear of death? As you know that this poem was written on the death of the common people. The poet is there in the churchyard, and he is, mourning on the death of, the common people. And he says that, the paths of glory lead but to the death, because after the death actually people are buried in the same grave, and there is no difference in rich and the poor people after the death. The first two lines and the last two lines, we have a device which is called rhetorical question. It's a figure of speech, rhetorical question. A question is asked not to get the answer, but to tell the answer. And it's always negative. Can storied urn or animated bust back to its mansion call the fleeting breath? The answer is no, it cannot. Neither the storied urn nor the animated bust can bring, the dead person to life, the dead person to the life. Now both these interrogations have the answers in themselves. They affirm the human mutability. Now the first line is also an example of allusion. I told you have to find out the allusion. When you are alluding something, when you are taking the references from the great texts, it is allusion. Storied urn. Urn which are having stories inscribed on them. Remember, ode on Grecian urn. So the words, storied urn, they bring to our mind the Greek practice of, painting stories on urns. You have seen in the poem ode on Grecian urn. Animated bust. This animated bust reminds us of a passage in the Bible, the book of Revelations, where an image is given the power to speak, that it is animated. So we have allusions here. Again, this word animated bust is an example of oxymoron. Bust and animated. Bust is lifeless. They are oxymoron, they are contradictions. Now, the sense that is presented in the first two lines of the storied urn or animated bust, calling for fleeting breath, is an example of personifications also, because they are personified. Fleeting breath is also a personified example of personification. Breath, seems to run away from the house. Here, mansion is metaphorically called the human body. Now, honor, then we have like dust, flattery. These are the words again which are personified. So you are going, in this quatrain, you are going to find out, many literary devices. So you have to, analyze them for the purpose of, better understanding, for the purpose of, critical appreciation. These are the points actually which you must keep in mind while, doing the critical appreciation. Similarly, you can take an example, like if you're going to analyze Ode to the West Wind or, Ode to a Nightingale or any poem, you'll find out many, literary devices that you are going to, maybe, if it is possible, try to find out the, rhyme scheme also, trying to find out meter also, because when you are going to find out the meter, they don't say whether lines are in iambic pentameter or in some other meter. If they are in iambic pentameter, then how are they in iambic pentameter? How are the syllables unstressed and stressed? How are they in 5 feet? Something like that you are going to analyze. But more than that, you are going to tell also that what kind of message the poem is communicating. So these are the points which I think if you keep in mind, then you can analyze the poem in a better way. Thank you very much.